All right, thanks everyone for joining to our next edition of 30 Minutes with a Hacker. I've got Brett Scott on the line and Josh Harp, two ethical hackers who have been in the trenches every day and continue to be so. And this is a monthly call that we do that we talk about different topics. And today's topic is around supply chain hacking and how that affects MSPs or MSSPs. To kick this off, I'm gonna let Josh kind of tee it up, because there's certain definitions of when we say supply chain hacks that it's important for us to kind of have a clarity on what exactly we're talking about, so that it doesn't get characterized the wrong way. And MSPs and MSSPs that this is going out to really can get an idea of how it does impact them. So I'm going to turn it over to Josh to kind of tee this up.
Yeah, so supply chain attacks can basically happen in any industry, from financial all the way to government. Typically, when we read about a supply chain attack in the news, if we think of a recent event titled Shadow Hammer, it was a situation in which the software had been compromised for ASUS. ASUS is a laptop manufacturer out of Taiwan. And so when most people hear about supply chain, they know that it's an adversary attacking a weak part of what is in their quote contacts or third-party vendors, or even within who they're working with. There are two different sides of the equation. One is that where the software has been compromised and a rootkit or malicious code has been introduced into the system, or there's the event where an adversary has taken advantage of a weak partner or third-party vendor within your supply chain. So all of it is categorized under the supply chain banner. All of it focuses on, either introducing code that's malicious into software, or exploiting vulnerabilities that lie in a weaker part of your supply chain. So the examples that we have are going to be Shadow Hammer, what's been dubbed by the great team over at Kaspersky. And then I also want to talk about Wipro, where the adversaries were targeting the third largest IT outsourcing firm. And there are indications that they're targeting more groups of those outsourced IT firms like Infosys and Cognizant. So again, supply chain attacks are primarily targeting less secure elements in your supply network. This could be third-party vendors or partners. As well, this could be going after specifically software manufacturers, or in the example of ASUS, specific software that is used on the laptops with the end goal of compromising specific individuals. Is that clear for you there, Jade?
Yeah, that's great. Brett, did you have anything you want to add to that, or are we good with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the supply chain attacks is absolutely a basic tradecraft for our nation states. And as we've been talking about before, there's been a big blur between hacking individuals, if you will, and nation states. It's kind of all blended together under the nation state umbrella. And this is just base tradecraft for them. It is absolutely happening to you. And what is happening as far as our awareness is concerned is we're being made aware of these things. And there have been some very, very big sort of dramatic world-changing announcements. But again, this is something that is not going away. It's becoming more and more prevalent. I can tell you in some of the discussions I have with folks in the FBI, this is one of their biggest problems. And this is other than the BEC scam, this is probably the largest thing that hurt American interests and our businesses. So we are absolutely facing an onslaught of these types of attacks.
So let's break it down from more in a more of a simplistic the way that hackers are getting into, let's say, the end user leveraging an MSP or MSSP? How are they pivoting? How are they getting in? And kind of step us through that.
Right. So the example we will probably want to point to is going to be what happened to Wipro. It's primarily done through phishing or through more complex methods of spear phishing. So directly, phishing is an all-encompassing term for email-based scams that attempt to get users to either go somewhere and click on a malicious link that's going to download an exploit kit, or you can have what is called spear phishing attacks, where it's directly pinpointed against certain users within the network. Most methods, an adversary isn't going to just be hitting against a brick wall that's your perimeter, right? Most organizations have a secure perimeter line of defense, and so the way that they circumvent this and get to the inside of your network is through the phishing schemes. Sending out targeted emails to specific users, attempting to get them to download malicious code onto their system so that they can then either leverage that person's mail account to do other types of schemes like this BEC scheme, or send and propagate throughout the internal network residing on the mail server, or attempting to pivot elsewhere to see what can they potentially find that is either critical data that they could then capture that critical data and trying to sell it to someone on the dark web, or see in certain situations or circumstances what type of access you might have. Now, in the example that I have shared on my screen here through Krebs on security, his analysis of why Wipro occurred and why people are targeting Infosys and Cognizant is because based on gift card scammers. The gift card scammers are trying to look at who's providing support to different organizations that are in the gift card industry. So they're trying to understand how they are either capturing this gift card scams occurring and how now they can circumvent the lines of defenses that they are establishing. But if we think of it from a reverse side, they're gaining access to one of the largest IT outsourced companies for United States-based organizations. And think about it, how many small businesses or how many large businesses who have outsourced IT permit for their outsourced IT to easily remote into their systems to perform administrative tasks. When we look at it that way, we could understand more impact beyond the gift card schemes and beyond the gift card scams and determining how to try and circumvent defenses. And we can say, well, there may even be a greater impact to what's going on, especially when they've so far now targeted 3 outsourced IT providers, and say, is there something greater happening, especially from the perspective of these are outsourced IT who you have trusted to connect to your infrastructure and your environment, and in many cases they are permitted to perform administrative tasks.
So on that front, everybody that is doing cybersecurity needs to understand that they're part of an ecosystem, they're part of a fabric, and they need to understand where they are in it, and then that will help them to understand how threats are coming at them in an asymmetric style. So you may not be the specific target, but you are absolutely on the way to the target, no matter where you are in the ecosystem. So why a nation state would go after your small business is because your small business has some contract or some connection or some trust relationship with the target that they're going after. So they go to you first, and then they use your connections, your tethers, your credibility, if you will, to then move horizontally into the target through your familiar relationship. So everybody has to think like an ecosystem.
And when you say into you're referring to the end user network, not the partners, correct? Because this is going after the partners.
This is a situation where it's quite literally both, but think about it this way. We're bringing up an MSSP. A partner is the same type of risk to their end customers. If you infiltrate the partner, that trusted relationship, vendor to customer relationship, is exactly the kind of thing that a nation state could use to then transition into their targets. So in this very specific case, end customers and partners are both on the absolute front lines of this stuff, and partners would be targeted so that they can use the trust relationships to move laterally towards their actual intended goal.
And to that point, I just want to add, I see a common trend with a lot of partners that are in this space where they are providing IT services to end user customers, but not necessarily securing their own infrastructure to the same level. There's a tendency to think, well, we don't really need to do that, even though that they're selling that concept to the end user customers. Or maybe you're dealing with a hospital or something that's in the HIPAA compliance requirements. Well, the fact that you're connected up to them impacts you, and that there could be HIPAA requirements now that you fall under because you're connected up. So maybe touch on that a little bit, Brett and Josh, because I think that's an important point.
Yeah, so I think if there's one takeaway that you take from this particular call, you are part of an ecosystem. That ecosystem is your vendors, your peers in the industry, the service companies that you utilize to deliver services to your end customers, and then of course your end customers. And it is only when you understand the threat landscape from an ecosystem perspective, instead of saying, I only need to worry about my own perimeter and that's the only thing I care about, it is exactly that mentality that is what the enemy is using to harm us and destroy our businesses. We have to begin to work collaboratively as a group of people to defend ourselves. And of course, as we resist that motion, right, as we resist that intelligent way to fight the enemy, regulators and all kinds of other creatures are moving in on us, and they will, similarly, they do not understand the ecosystem play themselves, but they will absolutely start using a hammer to then harm the businesses that get caught. So you think of it as there's a whack-a-mole going on, and you don't know when your head's popping up above the hole because there's all of this chaos and fog of war stuff going on. What a partner needs to do is to get a handle on this, to understand what's going on, and then be able to articulate that to all of the players that they have. And when they can do that, then they do not get whacked by things like regulatory. So HIPAA, Red Flag, GDPR, CCPA, which is the California Consumer Protection Act, taking place in January of this coming year. And there's a forthcoming national cyber privacy law. All of those things are things that are gotchas, right? You're moving along, just doing your thing, and all of a sudden, because this, that, and the other, you're now responsible for that, or you are going to be held accountable for some sort of data breach or loss of information. And that is the kind of risk that you don't want to gamble your business on. You do not want to lose your partner arrangement, your partners, and all of your ecosystem just because you managed to step on the wrong landmine. So it's important to engage with this, begin to start thinking as part of an ecosystem, and then of course when you do so, not only are you delivering better service to your end customers, it's invaluable because very few people understand that they're part of this ecosystem. So that means a lot of these folks that aren't paying attention are going to get picked off. So it's a good thing for business continuity to be on top of this.
So to maintain that, would you say it's important for one to understand the security policies and procedures that either as a vendor or a partner you have or your end customers have to be able to help maintain an equal ecosystem, as opposed to saying, oh, I don't need to know, or oh, I don't want to know, that you should actually go out and help mitigate supply chain based attacks, understand how they're handling security or what kind of policies or regulations they're actually held to.
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, most of the partners that we talk to would not know who to call either at their vendors or at their end customer if there was a supply chain breach. They wouldn't even know who to call that is directly affecting their business. So we absolutely have to solve that problem where you need to know the people that you're working with and as part of your stream. But continuing with that, there is a much larger thing going on. So ways that you can approach that. You can join groups like the FBI's InfraGuard program. InfraGuard is a public-private partnership between the FBI and private industry. It's free. You get a confidential clearance, which doesn't really mean a lot, but it's a useful thing. ISAOs, Information Sharing and Analysis Organizations. So Tech Data is actually coming forward with a partnership with an ISAO, which is sharing threat intelligence across industries. Those kinds of integrations and working with threat intelligence and community partners and community-minded organizations helps you stay on top of a very chaotic world.
Because if someone doesn't know, right, like if I don't know who I'm supposed to talk with at the end of the other end of my stream, doesn't that also permit for more successful supply chain-based attacks where someone's doing an impersonation measure, right?
Absolutely.
Or when someone's trying to say, oh, hey, I'm Joe Schmo from X organization. Here, download this PDF for our last contract and deal. You're like, oh, okay, like this seems legitimate. Okay, download, right? So if you don't know who's supposed to be on your stream and who you're supposed to be communicating with, it also lends an upper hand to the bad guys, right?
Absolutely. If you do not know who your fellow soldiers are, then you're going to get in a situation where either you or the wrong people get harmed in the conflict. If you leave it to chance, then by the time it becomes super urgent, you're already at a significant disadvantage. So why would you let that happen? It's not that hard to figure out who your players are in your stream.
You know, when we were prepping for this, Josh, we were chatting about train and HVAC systems, and there's elevator companies, and I think that was fascinating for me to kind of hear you talk through, and I'd like you to share kind of how they're leveraging that that relationship in the supply chain, using shirts, and how they're able to get those, you know, customized to be able to get in. So maybe just walk through that whole scenario.
Yeah, so I think the example I gave to you was an example of in penetration tests. One of the ways ethical hackers will go about trying to infiltrate through physical means. And so with most organizations, they have a typical vendor that they go to either for electrical work, for HVAC work, for elevator work, or whatever it might be. And so one of the measures penetration testers might do for a physical penetration test is determine who provides to you these services. And if they're not able to identify who provides you these services, one of the things they might go through is a common vendor. So an example of that might be Train, right? And so Train does HVAC systems, and one of the things we all know about is in malls there are these t-shirt printing little stalls where we can get whatever design we want printed, whatever logo we want printed, and you know, for 20 bucks they'll turn around a t-shirt to you in less than an hour, right? So some things I've seen physical penetration testers do is actually go out and buy a nice polo, get the polo stitched up nicely with a well-known company who provides these types of services logos. And what they do is they're providing false representation of a trusted organization who you might have worked for in the past. And this is one means by which they gain physical access into your environment because your security personnel are familiar with the organization. Sometimes facilities is familiar with the organization. Sometimes one of the things they'll do is they'll come after business hours, so the appropriate protocol that you typically follow is call the facilities manager and see, hey, is this person supposed to be here during this time and do this type of work? They attempt to circumvent those measures so as to gain physical access. So that would be an example in which one is taking advantage of a trust-based relationship you've already established to now compromise you from a physical perspective. Can we go so far as to say bad guys are doing this? Sure. Are we going to go so far as to say the bad guys who they're actually trying to catch are going to be the guys physically on site typically doing it? No, not necessarily, because that is a risk they're unwilling to take, but they may find an individual who for, $20 an hour will actually go and do this and drop USBs into that bank, or go and attempt to plug in a rogue device into the network at that store or at that office location. So it may not be a circumstance where the bad guy is actually going on site and doing it, but it would be an example of when he might facilitate the use of what is sometimes called mules to go and do it for him.
And we just saw this with Mar-a-Lago and Trump. There was a Chinese national who socially engineered her way past Secret Service, got herself into an area a building that Trump might be in, and she had malware-based USBs, which she was using to infect computers. So again, that's gaining holes, getting a presence, using a physical penetration to achieve the task, because apparently it was not available to them to do it remotely. So these types of things are not reserved for the President of the United States or to the military and things like that. This literally happens to everybody. The only difference is the military and all these other, the President and all those guys have much more savvy cybersecurity people around them. But that means also that everyone else doesn't. And that makes them easier prey, easier targets. And that's the part where there is the greatest risk to the partners and their end customers.
Yeah.
Just to add on to that, and maybe you guys can kind of expound on this, I thought it was interesting. If you think about, let's say, Trane, who does HVAC, or you think of Otis that does elevators in major manufacturers, think of a hacker hacking into one of those companies to access their database of their customers. And then you now have a way in, potentially through social engineering, to crack into other companies. So I'm thinking of how companies are pivoting and how hackers are. It's like it's not necessarily a hit from the direct. They're hitting it from different angles at 2 or 3 stages before you're actually getting to their actual target. And so it's a very complex type of an approach.
Exactly. So that directly will lead into what's been dubbed Operation Shadowhammer, right? In Operation Shadowhammer, they compromised ASUS's update utility. And in compromising ASUS's update utility, if during this time you were using the ASUS update util and you had a Windows laptop, you were compromised. But here's the thing, weaponization didn't occur against your machine. And you may say, well, why was that? If I was targeted, why wasn't my machine compromised? And the reason for that is because whoever these adversaries were, they were specifically going after 600 individuals. And those 600 individuals, they've identified based upon MAC addresses. So they don't know exactly who the individuals are, but they know who the systems, the potential systems are. They don't know who it belongs to, but they know which systems, because the MAC addresses, which is a hard-coded address on your network interface card, was programmed into the malicious code as to what it wanted to target. So they went after ASUS's update util, which impacted every individual who was using an ASUS laptop and had the ASUS update util installed, but they were specifically going after 600. So you don't know how many systems within the whole ecosystem had been compromised, only to identify specifically 600 individuals.
And by the way, that's just stupid luck.
Yeah.
They could have easily said, infect everybody, and everybody would have been infected because they infected the update service. It automatically rolled the compromise into your systems. And it was sheer luck that they didn't target everybody. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about. Your ecosystem understanding of cybersecurity is very important to your business, because you could spend a lot of money, you could be doing all kinds of preparations, but if you do not understand the war that's coming at you, then you're going to be unable to defend yourself. And that's why you need to understand how you fit and where you fit into the ecosystem, how you work with the other players, work with organizations like ISALs and the FBI's InfraGard program to assist you with a greater understanding of the threats that are coming at you.
Yeah, if we think of what the Iranians did to gain the schematics on one of the U.S. military drones, right? They were lucky in the fact that someone circumvented military IT policies, went out to Best Buy, bought an off-the-shelf router, plugged it in at home, and through that means they were able to compromise military accounts. And then in so gain confidential military information on how, was it a Reaper drone or whatever, was being developed and how it was manufactured and how it was created. So sometimes to get to their end goal, they'll end up, again, they're compromising the weakest link in the chain of in your supply chain to say, okay, I want military secrets. Who within that network might I be able to compromise? Is it going to be a third-party contractor? Like in the case of the shadow brokers information, many people have alluded that it was potentially a contractor who was compromised to ultimately get the programs and get that intelligence. So sometimes they're not directly going after the company or directly going after the organization. They're just going after someone who is less good at cybersecurity compared to their end target.
And this affects literally everybody. So MI6 is the British equivalent of the Central Intelligence Agency, and he was compromised because of his wife and social media. So it literally affects everybody. But the thing is that the head of MI6 has an entire security establishment around him to protect him from these types of threats. The rest of us are relying upon each other, which means it's even harder for us to fend off these threats, which is why we must collaborate, work together, and understand that we're part of a security ecosystem.
Does anyone have any questions on what we're discussing that's on the call? I know we're getting close to the end here. So if there's no questions, I want to just, one of the things that we it's a little bit of a tangent, but it ties into this, is around penetration testing and the limiting of scope that we're seeing a lot of times with end user customers. Partners run against this. We deal with it, Josh, directly, where they limit the scope so much that they're basically just box checkers. They're just trying to pass that, that requirement. But Josh, I want you to talk a little bit about that, because I think it's an important thing, and maybe Josh or Brett, if you've got any ideas on how to arm or help the partners know how to respond to this when they're dealing with someone like that, might be helpful.
So, sorry, I'm just going to jump in on this one. So the answer to that question is the people who are doing the box checking stuff, they have essentially mastered gaming the system so that they get the result that they want. They are absolutely not looking for the right answer, which is how do I actually defend myself? They're looking for a checkbox answer that somebody can say, oh yeah, we're doing a good job, look at this, we have a result. So I would say to you, it's a delicate balance, but one of the things that is important to mention is end customers who get a significant breach, depending on their size, could be completely out of business within 6 months. That's the average for small business. Because of that, they're literally playing Russian roulette with their own future. And so it will be one of those things where you say, you know what, why don't we do a penetration test that's sort of, generally off the record? Like, we're going to just do an assessment of it. We'll give you the answers, but it's not an official, big air quotes on official, penetration test. And that way you'll at least have an idea, a private idea of what you should be preparing for, so that when we go to do these penetration tests, you don't have to spend so much time, energy, and money limiting the scope of these engagements to get yourself an artificial answer.
Yeah, I think of it this way. When the purpose of penetration testing originally was to give organizations insight into tools, techniques, methodologies that adversaries would use against organizations. Now, what you see is, because penetration testing has been used for compliance, box checking, or just to assess a portion of your network, and now because of that, scopes get limited in so many ways, people are starting to come up with and offer these things called attack simulations. And so in doing an attack simulation, they're saying, do whatever you can to me so that I can detect how my policies, procedures, and technologies would work against a persistent threat, someone directly targeting me and going after me and trying to compromise my environment. Now, there are certain circumstances where in an attack simulation, an organization might try and limit the scope, whereas to say, don't target third-party software or don't target third parties. But here's the thing, in doing that, you're not getting an example of if someone were to compromise your organization through a third party. Now, I understand one might say, well, how can I get that approved? Or how do I get that approved? Well, start a conversation, right? We talked about your security ecosystem. Everyone who has invested in the security of your organization, who you might think could be the weakest link in your supply chain, maybe just start a conversation with them and pose it as a supply chain assessment or an assessment that is looking to see if you are the weak link or if someone else is the weak link. What it all comes together about is working together collaboratively, so as to say, we need to work together and help bring everyone up to a mature security posture and be willing to say, hey guys, I'm falling short in this way. And is there some way someone can help me? The answer from Tech Data's perspective is yes, we can help you get to a mature security posture. But you have to be willing to say, you know, I recognize that there are potentially weak spots in my network, and I know that in doing a no bars held or in permitting for the scope to be broad and not try and limit it, that I could potentially find things that are embarrassing. But think about it this way. How much more embarrassing will it be when you become the next individual who's on the news in a target situation where you've been the one that's been breached? Brett gave an example that it's 6 months before small businesses are typically out of business. There are other situations where compliance and regulatory means are starting to create larger and larger fines. So we have to start to take this seriously from the perspective of it's going to be good when an ethical hacker finds what's wrong in your network and reports it to you. It may be embarrassing and it may be hard to report to your higher ups or your management, but think how much more embarrassing it will be when someone unethical does it and is now selling your data on either the deep or dark web and is now attempting to hold you ransom because of a mistake that you made or a mistake that wasn't found because of how much you attempt to game the system or limit the scope within a penetration test or an attack simulation.
Great, great, Brett and Josh responses to that. So we need to wrap this up. I appreciate everyone who's been on the call, and I look forward to next month's call. Thanks, Brett and Josh. Really appreciate the time and preparation you put into this, and we'll see you guys on the next call. Take care.